Have you ever wondered why certain buildings seem timeless? From the Parthenon to the Colosseum, from St. Peter's in Rome to the United States Capitol, architects have been speaking the same architectural language for more than 2,000 years. Most people see columns, arches, and ornamentation, but like any language, architecture has a grammar beneath the surface. That grammar is expressed through a carefully ordered system of proportion, hierarchy, and design known as the Classical Orders. Learning to recognize that system is one of the first steps towards learning to see like an architect. In this series, we'll learn how to draw the 5 classical orders. But before we put pencil to paper, we first need to understand the language we're trying to draw. So let's begin by exploring what the 5 classical orders are, where they come from, and why they've remained the foundation of classical architecture for centuries. So the first question to ask is, what is a classical order? Most people think of an architectural order as simply a type of column. While columns are certainly an important part of every classical order, they're only one piece of a much larger system. An order is a complete architectural system governed by proportion. It establishes the relationships between the column, its base and capital, the entablature above, and the pedestal beneath, creating a unified whole rather than just a collection of individual parts. In other words, an order isn't just a collection of architectural elements. It's a set of rules that determines how those elements relate to one another. Before we go any further, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Luke, a full-time architectural designer with a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture and a Master of Architecture focused on traditional and classical design. I have 6 years of formal architectural training, about a year and a half of professional experience, and I've just been obsessed with traditional architecture for more than 10 years, and I am excited to share that passion with you and whoever else might be interested throughout the course of this series. Now let's get into a bit of history. Where did the orders come from? The story of the classical orders begins in ancient Greece. Over several centuries, the Greek architects developed an elegant architectural language centered around 3 orders: the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. These buildings were constructed using trabeation, which is also known as post and lintel construction, in which horizontal beams are supported by vertical columns. Then after the rise of Rome, the Romans took over where the Greeks left off. They continued to refine the original 3 orders and introduced the world to the Tuscan order, which was originally developed by the Etruscans, as well as the Composite Order. Much of what we know about Roman architectural theory comes from the architect Vitruvius, whose treatise De Architectura, or the 10 books on architecture, became one of the most influential architectural texts ever written. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, classical architectural knowledge was never completely lost. Vitruvius's writings survived through the manuscripts of the medieval monks, while elements of classical architecture continued to appear in Byzantine, Romanesque, and even Gothic buildings, although the orders themselves were no longer the primary organizing system they had once been. It wasn't until the Renaissance that Vitruvius's writings were widely studied once again, and architects such as Alberti, Serlio, Palladio, Vignola, and others carefully studied Roman ruins alongside Vitruvius's writings, developing the proportional systems that continue to be taught today. Now, if all of that sounds a little overwhelming, don't worry. Once we begin drawing the orders one by one, you'll see just how logical and also surprisingly approachable this system really is. So let's move on to the 5 orders themselves. What exactly do these 5 classical orders look like? Although they all share the same underlying principles, each of them has its own proportions, ornamental character, and architectural personality. Over time, architects learn to choose the order that's best suited to the purpose and expression of a building. Before we examine each order individually, let's first look at the elements that they all have in common. Each of the orders is made up of several parts: the column, the entablature above, and the pedestal below. The column itself is split into 3 parts: the base on the bottom, the shaft in the center, and the capital on top. The entablature, likewise, is also divided into 3 parts: the architrave on the bottom, the frieze in the center, and a series of moldings known as the cornice on the top. Each order is governed by a proportional system based on the diameter of the column. Once that basic unit is established, every other dimension can be derived from it. A remarkably elegant system that is both flexible and surprisingly straightforward to learn the basics of. As we look at the orders to follow, you'll notice a general progression from the simplest to the most elaborate. the proportions become more slender, the capitals more intricate, and the overall ornamentation increasingly rich. If you've made it this far into the video, please consider subscribing. I've got a lot more educational architecture content on the way, from tutorials and sketching techniques to architectural history and portfolio reviews. I hope you'll stick around. Now, back to the video. Starting with the Tuscan order, which is the simplest of the five. Characterized by its stout proportions, its smooth shaft, its simple capital, and restrained entablature, it conveys strength through noble simplicity. Although generally associated with the Romans, it was originally developed by the Etruscans, from whom it receives its name. The Doric order is the next step in this progression and is the oldest of the three Greek orders. Its stout masculine proportions, fluted shaft, and broad simple capital display compression, strength, and quiet dignity. The Parthenon in Athens remains one of its most celebrated examples. The Ionic order is the second of the Greek orders. Its most recognizable feature is the pair of graceful spiral volutes that crown the capital. Unlike the compressed simplicity of the Doric, the Ionic introduces a greater sense of elegance and visual refinement, while gently mediating between the vertical column and the horizontal entablature above. The Corinthian order is the most refined of the Greek orders, distinguished by its slender proportions, richly carved capitals of stylized acanthus leaves, and abundant ornamentation. Here, the architecture seems almost to spring into bloom, emphasizing grace, verticality, and upward movement. The Composite order is a Roman invention, combining the proportions and acanthus leaves of the Corinthian with the scrolled volutes and egg and dart moldings of the Ionic, resulting in the most elaborate and ornate of all the five orders. At first glance, it might be easy to look at this architecture as simply a relic of the past with little relevance today, while in reality, the opposite is true. The principles embodied in the classical orders, their careful proportions, their relationship to the human scale, their hierarchy, and their intentional use of ornament, have endured for thousands of years because they continue to resonate with the way we experience architecture and life in general. They are not merely historical curiosities, but one of the clearest and most refined system of architectural design ever developed. As a matter of fact, even many of the pioneers of modern architecture received the classical education or deliberately studied the classical tradition before developing their own architectural philosophies. Regardless of the style an architect ultimately chooses to design in, there is so much to be gained from studying the lessons preserved in the classical orders. The orders, however, are not an end in and of themselves. They are a foundation. Classical architects do not simply copy the past. They study it, learn from it, and continue to design in a living tradition that has been developing for more than 2,000 years. And that's exactly the point of this series. We'll begin by learning the fundamental proportions of each order through simple block drawings. From there, we'll gradually work our way towards complete drawings of the capital, the entablature, all of the moldings, and eventually fully composed architectural designs. My hope is that, by the end of this series, you'll not only be able to recognize and draw each of the five classical orders with confidence, but that you'll be able to learn to see architecture differently, to recognize the underlying principles that have shaped some of the world's greatest buildings for more than 2 millennia. So grab a pencil and let's begin with the first and simplest of the classical orders, the Tuscan. If you're interested in taking this journey with me, click on the video on the end screen to get started. I'll also be compiling these videos into a playlist for easy access. Thanks so much, and have a great day. I'll see you there.